transfer window hasn't even started yet, and already I think we've started to see a few things that can help us start to draw a few conclusions. Right, well, so far we've sent a Scouser to Spain. We've signed a goalkeeper who I can't say his name, but I think it rhymes. And Man United fans have been photoshopping pictures of kids. So standard procedure for silly season, that few sort of weeks in no man's land before the transfer window opens. At least, hopefully, very soon we will have some World Cup football to distract us. There's also loads more stuff has happened that I'll get into everything that's happened because, as I said at the start, I think a lot of the things that we've seen can help us start to draw some conclusions on what's actually going on that we don't sort of explicitly get told about. And just quickly, I'll pop this as a pinned comment. How do you guys feel about what we know of the summer so far? Like, if you were to rate, I know there hasn't been loads go on yet, but there has still been some movement. Are you confident? What would you rate everything that we know so far out of 10? Like the players we've been linked to, the players that we've signed, the players that we've sold, the players that look like they're potentially going to be leaving, the way the Gordon deal went, and then obviously anything else that you think I've missed. Just like, where are you at overall? How would you rate everything so far out of 10? And then if you can be bothered, let me know why as well. But anyway, let's get into it. So I mentioned Anthony Gordon leaving for Barcelona. And the reason this is sort of interesting for me is obviously partially because have we potentially learned from last year and not letting things drag out, like the way that we've just sort of extracted maximum value, that, you know, it looks like we've potentially learned from last year and we're not letting something like the Isak situation pan out. But then potentially you could say, could we have potentially got more money after the World Cup if he has a good World Cup? Are we a little bit potentially scarred by last season where we're just like, we're not willing to even take the risk on trying to extract max value? I've seen a few people commenting things like that. So, you know, like, what do you guys think on that? Do you think we should have waited till after the World Cup and potentially got more value? I personally aren't too convinced he's going to have that great of a World Cup. And if the performance against New Zealand is anything to go by, then I think I'm probably going to be right. But then the New Zealand game, like, you can't really take much from that, to be honest. But actually, the main reason I'm interested in the fact that Gordon's gone isn't necessarily because of how it was done or how fast it was done or anything like that. Is because if we look at Eddie Howe's sort of unfairly undroppable favourites, the ones that would come to mind would be Jacob Murphy, Dan Burn, Kieran Trippier, Joe Linton, Nick Pope and Anthony Gordon. And it's looking very much now like at least 3 of them are going to be leaving this summer. That looks pretty much dead on. And that's despite the fact that it was actually reported that Eddie didn't want Anthony Gordon to leave. And I'd say it's also probably pretty likely that he probably, obviously this isn't confirmed in any way, but I'd just say it's quite likely that he probably expressed a desire for Pope and Trippier to stay as well. So for me, that sort of helps me draw a certain level of a conclusion, but I'll get further into what that conclusion is later in the video because the point that I make later in the video also kind of adds to that conclusion. So moving on from there, obviously I've just said about Pope potentially leaving, which is sort of a bit crazy because all we've actually done so far is we have signed a goalkeeper, but we've signed a goalkeeper from the French second league who is 20 years old. So in terms of like overall strategy and how this summer's going to play out, you have to then say that we are going to go sign another goalkeeper if Nick Pope leaves, because you can't throw a 20-year-old that's only had Liga 2 experience, you can't throw him straight in the Premier League. Like, that would be insanity. As much as he is like a major data standout player and he was potentially tipped to be the successor to Thibaut Courtois at Madrid, Eddie's going to love this. He needs to be drip fed into the team. You can't just throw him straight in. That would be just mental. But despite the fact that, you know, we are likely going to sign another goalkeeper because he's not going to come in and be the number 1, despite that, it's still a really interesting signing because of what I said before about the fact that he's a major like data standout. And this is why we ended up paying 28 million euros for him, because Rems only actually asked for 20 million euros, but we reportedly essentially ended up in a bidding war because other teams were circling. As I said, he was earmarked to be the successor for Courtois. And that's apparently because he has like that commanding stature, really, really fast reflexes, really good in one-on-ones. And also, because like Nick Pope has a lot of them things. He's big, you know, he's got quite good reflexes, at least before he had his shoulder injury. But obviously Nick Pope's massive problem was he could not kick a ball to save his life. And apparently this kid can. Apparently his distribution is really good. His short passing is incredibly accurate. I know there is one clip circling around of an absolute Nick Pope style blunder, but like every keeper is capable of that. Like you wouldn't say David Raya is a particularly bad keeper with the ball at his feet, yet he has made, you know, some quite famous blunders here and there. Like it's just part and parcel of the risk of being a modern day goalkeeper, is that from time to time, stuff like that will happen. The problem is with Nick Pope, it felt like every single time the ball was passed back to him, the entire stadium just took a collective gasp of air. Like, it felt like the stadium turned into a vacuum for a second. It was just like... So anyway, the reason I find this slightly interesting, and with him being like this data standout, is because this is some news that sort of went slightly under the radar. Some of you will probably know about this, but like, it wasn't super mainstream news. So we recently onboarded some dude from Silicon Valley, some like genius kid who's got like a master's degree in applied statistics. And his job is to essentially build like a ChatGPT style bot, essentially, where you can just ask it, this is what I'm looking for in a player, and it'll kind of compile all the data accurately, not like ChatGPT, it'll actually do it accurately, and it'll give you like a list of players that you're looking for. And then obviously from there, then you go through the usual kind of scouting process. So instead of like ChatGPT, where if you were to ask it like, who would you expect to be Newcastle's top goal scorer this season, and it gives out like Anthony Gordon or something like that, who's not even going to play for us next season. Instead of that like comically inaccurate stuff that you get from AI at the moment, this will be one that kind of does a similar thing to ChatGPT, but just instead it analyzes data accurately, and it'll have access to tons of data that things like ChatGPT just can't access. And then the reason I find that even more interesting is because of that whole Whoop Gate rabbit hole I've been going down. Obviously, I first posted on X that theory very late in the night, and then by the following day, it had kind of gone viral, and Lee Ryder then even posted an article where essentially sources within the club had kind of said that, you know, that is not going to be the case, and that Whoop are not the front of shirt sponsor. Now, obviously, some people are commenting saying, you know, that could just be them trying to, like, you know, throw people off the scent or whatever. I don't really think it is. I think it is probably true that it's not the front of shirt sponsor. But what I am very convinced about is that something is coming with Whoop, and I think it's something big. If I get the time to look into it, I will look further into it, and I will, you know, post my findings. But at the moment, what I'm sort of looking back is if we cast our mind back to the Matfin Hall Summit towards the end of last season, a lot of what came out from that was that the club want to focus a lot more on data and start being essentially pioneers in terms of like sports science, sports technology, and start using AI within football and all that kind of stuff. So I think when we combine everything together with us signing this Silicon Valley genius kid to do some data-led stuff, then also with potentially Whoop coming on and doing something, I don't know what yet, but they will be involved in some capacity with some sort of data-led data harvesting, data-ness. Altogether, I just think Whoop are going to be part of some big kind of sports science-y pioneering technology thing that we're going to be using going forward, that's going to hopefully give us some kind of competitive advantage, whether it be through like managing the current team, scouting players from around the world, like whatever it's going to be. I mean, we can't really throw Whoop bans on random people that we haven't signed, so it's probably going to be more related to our current team, but potentially Whoop will maybe even be able to stop all our injury problems, because we'll be able to actually track, you know, like strain levels and things like that using Whoop. So like, I know it probably sounds like I'm like affiliated with Whoop or something at the moment. I'm not at all. I just am really convinced that something is coming with them. I just don't know what. I think also when you take into account that PSG also signed that deal with Whoop, and you look at the way that they play very similar to a sort of Eddie Howe style system where there's a lot of pressing, a lot of intensity. You know, it's very like fast paced, sort of like heavy metal style football. Maybe the way to be able to manage that over the course of a season, maybe you need very accurate data to do that. And maybe Whoop are going to be the people that give us the accurate data to be able to manage that effectively without getting tons of injuries. So maybe that's our way forward. I don't know. But Whoop, something's coming with Whoop. That's the point. Now, obviously, to further that sort of data approach that we're taking to things, another thing that's interesting that also came from the Matfin Hall Summit was that we're going to be looking for kind of hidden gems from around Europe, young players that we can kind of coach into being potentially double or triple their value, and pulling away from this kind of like overpriced Premier League proven model that Eddie Howe apparently seemingly wanted us to go towards, and essentially going more towards what Paul Mitchell disagreed with Eddie Howe about, and we're now kind of essentially doing what Paul Mitchell said. And obviously everything that we've seen so far is all rumors. We don't know if any of it is true. But what I would say is that all of the rumors in terms of like replacing Anthony Gordon, in terms of obviously the goalkeeper that we've even signed, that's not a rumor. Like literally everyone that we seem to have been linked with in the past 2 or 3 weeks does fit that profile. It fits the profile of young, from abroad, cheaper, that can be coached into special players, as opposed to going and wasting 50 odd million pound on a Johan Wissa. So as I said, all them rumors might not be true at all, but the fact that everyone fits into that profile tells me that that seems like it is happening, especially the fact that, as I said, we signed a player within that profile already. And then what this potentially says to me, and this kind of takes me back to the first point at the start of the video, the fact that not only are we selling a lot of Eddie Howe's sort of unfairly undroppable favorites, but we're also essentially, as I said, going away from what Eddie Howe's strategy was that he fell out with Paul Mitchell about, and kind of being like, actually, Paul Mitchell was right, we're going to do what he said, and you can either stick around and manage it, or, well, you don't have a choice, this is what you're doing. Which for me is a huge relief, because I think my biggest fear going into this summer was that we were going to basically spend another sort of like £200 million on Eddie Howe's type of player, and we potentially see a similar scenario to what we did at Bournemouth, where apparently, according to Bournemouth fans, the more and more he spent on the type of players that he wanted, the worse they got, and then eventually they got relegated. So it seems like Eddie Howe's influence over signings has been sort of taken away from him a bit, which, you know, is what we heard was part of the outcomes of the Matt Van Hall summit, which, as I said, makes me a lot more relaxed going into the summer, because the other side of it as well is I was just so worried that I don't think Eddie's going to be here for the long term anyway, in the sense that, like, I don't think he's the man to take us past this level. I've said that a billion times in videos before. I don't think he's the one that's going to have us competing where the ownership apparently want us to compete at. But the last thing I wanted to see is as I said, going and sign 3 or 4 of his players, and then the next manager that does come along being stuck with these athletes that he can't actually play good football with, and that puts us another sort of 3 or 4 years back with PSR, because we then have to come up with the money again with these kind of deadwood players. We have to come up with the money again to be able to then go and sign the players for the next manager. So at least, regardless of whether Eddie Howe is going to be here or not, we have a strategy in place for the type of players that we want to sign. And now it's a case of, Eddie Howe, if you can't make them players work, you're going to be gone and someone else will. I just hope to God that the people in charge aren't actually scouting with Eddie Howe's playing philosophy in mind. I hope that there is a bit more of a stress on technical ability over athletes. That's the one thing that I am still a little bit worried about, but at least it's not Premier League proven wastes of money. And at least this means hopefully the end to us ever pursuing anyone like Liam Delap ever again. It seems finally like we are taking on the Brighton model. Now, speaking of Brighton, everyone has lost their heads over the past week or so because we have lost out on a player that realistically none of these people actually knew he existed until he was already on the plane to Brighton. And like, I understand people being worried that we're losing out to Brighton. And this is no disrespect to Brighton at all, and I'll explain exactly why it's no disrespect to Brighton in a minute, but we are a bigger club than Brighton, so I understand why people are a bit like upset about us losing out to them when, you know, trying to attract players. But you know who's a bigger club than both us and Brighton? Chelsea. And Chelsea were also in the running for him. They'd also had a bid accepted, and he still chose Brighton over Chelsea. I think we simply have to accept that we aren't going to win every bidding war. It's just not going to happen. And I think we need to not lose our heads every single time that does happen, because yes, we're potentially, some of the fans are a little bit emotionally scarred by what happened last summer, but like, this is just reality, especially when you are coming up in a bidding war for a young player with potential like that against Brighton, who are probably the best team in the Premier League at developing young players' careers. Like, I understand that that's where we've said we want to be at, and 5 years into a project, we should realistically be closer to being able to compete with Brighton than we are in terms of developing young players' careers. But I just sort of think, like, you win some, you lose some, and I just don't think this is like cause for like a major head loss at the moment. We have a lot of work to do before we are anywhere even near Brighton in terms of being able to develop young foreign players and, you know, coach them into being able to be, you know, world beaters in this league. Like, we are nowhere near Brighton on that level. And I mean, one of the main problems that we have to address on that is the fact that Eddie Howe in his entire career has only ever given appearances to 3 players under the age of 23 that he's bought from a foreign league. And to say that's essentially our whole recruitment policy at the moment, apparently from the sounds of things don't really seem aligned on the managerial front, but only time will tell how that pans out. But for now, yes, the manager might not be the best man to take us forward with the current recruitment strategy. You know, his experience in management and his skill set might not be at all aligned with what we're apparently doing, but The positives are, at least the recruitment strategy seems like the type of recruitment strategy that we want to be doing as opposed to what we were doing. Like, yes, it makes absolutely no sense at all to change your recruitment strategy to something that your manager quite literally never does and have that not aligned, but it makes more sense than what we were doing before, which was just absolute nonsense. And I'm full of great segues into the next section today, because speaking of nonsense, Man United fans have been using AI to edit pictures of Lewis Hall as a kid to suggest that he was a boyhood Man United fan. So let me just quickly put that one to bed for you.
Yeah, my dad was born in Newcastle, so he obviously supported Newcastle whilst he was growing up and stuff. Along with my grandparents, so yeah, and then as soon as me and my brother were born, we was both straight away, right, you're Newcastle, you're not anyone else, so yeah, it kind of just got drilled into us that we had to be Newcastle fans, which I'm very happy about, so.
Now, if this isn't a colossal fall from grace from the once massive club that Man United were, then I don't know what is. Like, once upon a time, any player that Man United showed interest in, they'd have been there in a heartbeat. Well, except Shearer, of course. Although he was close to going, to be fair. But now, like, their fan base doing things like this to try and force a narrative that they've completely made up, like, it just reeks of desperacy to be back to where they used to be, like, and it's just not happening. It's really not happening. And even the ones that aren't doing this absolute madness, like the ones that aren't photoshopping pictures of kids and stuff like that, there's still loads more that are just as bad, because there's so many more Man United fans that like genuinely believe that they can get Lewis Hall for £50 million. And like the way that they're talking about it is almost as if we're the crazy ones for suggesting otherwise. Like £50 million is the genuine price tag that they're quoting as like the maximum amount that they would be willing to pay. And bear in mind, they signed Luke Shaw 12 years ago for 30 million. Like, just think of how much prices in football have changed in that time. We signed Lewis Hall a few years back as a player that had like a handful of appearances in the Premier League. We signed him for 35 million. He's then gone on to become one of the best left backs in world football. If you disagree with that, he is definitely at least one of the best left backs in the Premier League. He's pocketed Lamine Yamal for a full 90 minutes in the Champions League, and they think we're just going to be like, oh yeah, we'll just take like 15 million profit. And then they're using this whole like what the Liverpool fans did with the whole Isak thing of like, you don't want to keep an unhappy player, which he hasn't even said he's unhappy, by the way. They've made this up, but it's as if they're now like trying to copy their rivals, by the way, in the way that they dealt with us in the last transfer window. It's as if they're trying to copy them, which is embarrassing enough as it is, trying to copy your rivals, but they're also doing it from a position where at least Liverpool had won the title when they did it. Man United have had like the best season they've had in fucking years, and they still finished third. Like, yeah, it might have worked for Liverpool when we didn't basically have a board at the time, no sporting director, no CEO, basically fucking no one other than Eddie Howe and his nephew or whatever the fuck Andy Howe is to him. That was all that was going on in the club. So yeah, Liverpool were able to take advantage of that situation when they had literally just won the title, and then Man United are trying to copy their rivals and do the same thing in a completely different scenario. Not only did Liverpool have the pull of just having won the title, but also Isak was a rat, Lewis Hall isn't. Isak had no affiliation to Newcastle at all. Lewis Hall's entire family and himself are Newcastle fans. And with all that context in place, these Man United fans think that they can get a better deal for Lewis Hall than Liverpool got on Isak by trying to copy them and do the same thing. Like, honestly, it's just fucking insane. And then for one last incredible segue from Liverpool to more Liverpool, after they told us all year, last year, that, you know, you shouldn't hold a player hostage and to free Isak, and, you know, if a player doesn't want to be there and he wants to go to another club, you should just let him go. It's so embarrassing to keep a player against their will. Well, Rio and Gamoa agreed personal terms with Bayern Munich, and now they're holding him hostage. It's a bit awkward, isn't it, Liverpool? What happened to if a player doesn't want to be there, you just get rid of him? Thought that was how it worked. Guess not. Which, by the way, just go and have a look at the way that Fabrizio Romano and everyone have reported Liverpool's rebuttal to this. Because obviously when they were in for Isak, when we had our rebuttals, it was like Newcastle are trying their best to keep hold of him, whereas with Liverpool, it was like, he is not for sale. end of. Like, it's so clear to see in the way that, you know, like Romano and Ornstein, the way that they report these kind of stories from one club to another, like, you can see that it just depends on whose narrative they're trying to push at the time. That was made even more obvious by the fact that when we did sign this goalkeeper, this Ewan kid, whatever he's called, when we did sign him, like, all of the local journalists from Newcastle, they were all reporting it. There wasn't a single peep out of Romano or Ornstein for a good like 2 or 3 hours after basically everyone in Newcastle already knew about it. And that's because, surprisingly enough, as it was shown there, they actually have very little contact with anyone in the club. So whenever they're saying, oh, well, this is Newcastle's stance or that's Newcastle's stance, they don't actually have a fucking clue. All they know is what the agent of a player is telling them. But anyway, yeah, overall, some positives to take. Still not majorly confident because Eddie Howe is in charge. I've made it very clear over the past sort of few months why I'm not particularly confident going forward. But at least all the news that's came out over the past couple of weeks has been relatively positive. So that's good. That's nice. But anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to do all the liking, subscribing, hyping, sharing, whatever else helps the channel grow. Please do that stuff. Hope you have enjoyed the video and thank you for watching. That's all the noise for this one. Until the next one.